Over to you.
Good morning. It's 9 o'clock. We will begin the proceeding for today's meeting. I'd ask everybody to stand for Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning. For the record, there's a copy of the Open Meetings Act located on the north wall of the legislative chambers. For those for health reasons, for purposes, just in case we need it, there's an automatic defibrillator outside the dividers there on the far back wall through those offices. And also, if you have any cell phones, I'd ask you to please turn them off or silence them at this time. With that, we will call to order the Board of Equalization meeting.
Commissioner Borgeson is absent. Commissioner Boyle, Commissioner Kavanaugh, Commissioner Duda, Commissioner Kraft, Commissioner Morgan, Mr. Chair.
Here, item A is approval of the minutes of the Board of Equalization meeting held Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019. Item B is call for a meeting that's set Tuesday, August 6th, 2019, as the set date for hearing on certified assessments and corrections. What's the will of the board? Motion by Commissioner Duda, second by Commissioner Boyle. Please vote.
Commissioner Boyle's vote won't appear due to technical difficulties.
We'll get it fixed real quick, Mike. I'm just
He votes yes, as do the rest of the commissioners present. Motion passes.
Item C, citizens' comments. This is an opportunity for citizens to comment on Board of Equalization items that are not listed on the agenda. Are there any citizens' comments? Seeing none, we'll go on to approve items D, E, and F, but we will have some comment on item D. What's the will of the board?
Move the approval of resolutions D, E, and F.
Motion by Commissioner Duda, second by Commissioner Kraft. And excuse me, we'll have comment on. Catherine, do you want to explain it or need to explain anything on it? Do you need to? Okay. With that, there's motion second to approve D, E, and F. Please vote.
Motion passes 6-0.
Item G is three-year plan for assessments. Mike Goodwillie.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Mike Goodwillie, Douglas County Assessor, Register of Deeds Office. I think presentation is maybe a little bit grandiose. The law requires that we prepare a three-year plan of assessment, and we provide it to the county board at this time every year. And so this is this year's version. If I were to boil it down in its essence, it's really just all going to be about what we see the buyers and sellers doing. Projecting 2 or 3 years out is really hard without having that knowledge. Currently what we're seeing is the continuation of a pretty robust residential real estate market. And so we are coming to kind of the end of the 2-year sales study period against which our 2020 values will be judged. When those sales are all done and in and analyzed, we'll probably be able to say a little bit more about what we expect in 2020. But this is just a rough outline of what we think our work is going to look like over the next few years.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
The certification that you make annually of
of the valuation. When do you present that to us?
Well, I don't know if we present it, but what we do is we send a certification of the value to all of the political subdivisions in Douglas County by the 20th of August.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. All in, all done? Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second?
Motion by Commissioner Duda, second by Commissioner Boyle. Please vote.
Motion passes 6-0.
We'll now call to order the Board of Commissioners meeting. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Borgeson is absent. Commissioner Boyle. Commissioner Kavanaugh. Commissioner Duda. Commissioner Kraft. Commissioner Morgan. Mr. Chair.
Here, item 1 is minutes and claims. Letter A is the approval of the minutes of the Board of Commissioners meeting held Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019. Item B is approval of claims submitted for payment and process through Tuesday, July 30th, 2019. What's the will of the board? Motion by Commissioner Boyle. Second by Commissioner Duda. Please vote.
This is a meeting. Yes. Be abstaining. Those checks are my comment.
Okay.
Motion passes. Commissioner Morgan abstains. Other commissioners voting yes.
We're going to alter the agenda. We'll go to item 3, recognitions and proclamations. First, item A is recognition of the Waterloo and Valley Fire Departments for their heroic work during the spring 2019 flood event. Is Captain Hudson here?
Captain Hudson's on his way up.
Okay, do you want to?
I don't have the information.
All right, let's go to item B then. Recognition of the following county employees retiring. Clarence Curry is retiring from the Douglas County Department of Corrections after 29 years of service. We'd like to thank Mr. Curry for the service and wish him well in his retirement. Is there a motion approved by the board? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Duda. Please vote.
Motion passes 6-0.
All right, we're going to go. We're going to do go a little bit. We're going to do citizens' comments at this time for the Board of Commissioners. Item 4 is citizens' comments. This is an opportunity for individuals to comment on Board of Commissioners related items that are not listed on this week's agenda. Are there any citizens' comments at this time?
Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, Nebraska, 68132. My comments today are about civility in government, local government, state government, county board, and city council. I've been to a lot of these meetings, and I've witnessed a lot of what I consider uncivility by commissioners at other commissioners, but also by commissioners at citizens. I, for one, have been referred to as person without the facts, that type of thing, or maybe making up facts, that type of thing. I have listened to attacks on Mr. Kavanaugh because he brings up hard questions, which is supposed to be done, particularly by you people at the microphone there, as an unfair tactic. And the manner or the behavior of those questioning of his questions is rather uncivil. Yet we citizens are removed from the podium for acting like that. It's not just the county board. Last week or the week before, Mr. Gregg gave us an opening comments about civility, referring only to the vitriol in Washington. But we all know who he was talking about. We don't expect our citizen representatives to get up and lecture us about those things. It's not a place for his public opinions to be expressed at the microphone about federal government. This is not a federal government. I'll add one other thing. Something happened to me in the public library in a meeting room or a seating area off of a meeting room that maybe was rented by a citizen for a group. But in that public seating area, I was told I was unwelcome. And I was threatened with protection orders for being there and maybe wanting to speak. That's not civility. Yet that same person went around talking about civility in government. And it's time we practice what we preach. So that's what I'm here for, is to try and give a civics lesson on civility in government, which most taxpayers don't see because they're not here. Where are the young people today? They're not here. Only if they're coming down here for a specific reason, a person, are they here. Thank you.
Any other citizens' comments? Seeing none, we'll go back up to item A under recognition and proclamations, and the recognition of the Waterloo and Valley Fire Departments for their efforts during the floods. Captain Hudson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry, I had to go back and get my readers. Commissioners, thank you for allowing me to address this body today. I stand before you today to recognize two groups of volunteers that provide emergency services during the spring 2019 flood event. Prior to March 14, 2019, local first responders were pre-warned of a possible flooding event. No one could have imagined the historic flood that engulfed western Douglas County. The rising water cut off many of our neighbors and friends, leaving them stranded without any support. Through it all, the Waterloo and Valley Fire Departments and my team stood ready to implement our emergency plan. Our plan was to respond proactively rather than reactively to this natural disaster. Part of the plan called for voluntary evacuation of homes in the expected flood zone. However, many disregarded our repeated requests to leave and remained in their homes. Consequently, they became trapped by the rising waters. Calls for rescue assistance quickly came into our 911 center. Extreme windy conditions and rapidly rising waters were factors faced by these agencies. We all can say how brave we would be dealing with these challenges. Not only did these individuals rise to the challenge, but they did so in exemplary form. When Sheriff Dunning, Congressman Bacon, and I arrived at King Lake, which is one of our rescue areas, we saw firsthand the heroic life-saving measures being performed by these volunteer responders. Rescue after rescue, volunteer first responders risked their own lives in an effort to save their fellow citizens. The floodwaters eventually blocked all exits from the cities of Waterloo and Valley. These brave men and women remained in the flood zone and continued to provide emergency rescue services to the citizens. There were over 200 rescues performed, and only by God's grace and mercy did we not have any fatalities or serious bodily injuries. Chief Harlow, Chief Weekhorst, Chief Donahue, and Chief Deputy Wheeler, please join me at the podium. Will the men and women of the Valley and Waterloo Fire Department please stand or come forward? It is with all due respect and admiration that I present to you and your agency this plaque of appreciation. Please know that the Douglas County Sheriff's Office and the Waterloo Police Department are very appreciative of the job that you do, and we're most appreciative that you answered the call during this emergency. Thank you.
Would you put one of these underneath the telescope there, whatever we call that, overhead?
Why don't you gentlemen come on down, you can get some pictures in front of you.
Well, we'll go around. You can't see good. All right. Yeah, we're gonna go around.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great job, Jojo.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, unless I give you other ones.
County Commissioners, if you would just indulge me for another moment.
Yep.
Sergeant Tim Owens, down front. Sergeant Tim Owens is my Special Services Division Sergeant. He's in charge of our school resource officers and also our traffic unit. But on this day, during the flood, he was also instrumental in making sure we coordinate all of our law enforcement response. If it wasn't for Sergeant Owens, our law enforcement response would have been lackluster. So I just want to read this into the record. On March 14th, Western Douglas County was engulfed in a record-setting flood. A unified command system was set up and the Elkhorn branch was formed. Early on, it was evident that the coordinated law enforcement presence was necessary to ensure all law enforcement agencies were working in a cooperative and coordinated manner. To accomplish this task, Sergeant Owens did the following. He established a law enforcement command workstation whereby all requests for law enforcement services in and around the flood zone were received and dispatched from one central location. He kept track of all law enforcement agencies to include the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, the Waterloo Police Department, Valley Police Department, Nebraska State Patrol, Omaha Police Department, and the Nebraska National Guard. He worked with the Elkhorn branch command staff to ensure that all emergency services were handled in a timely manner. He physically monitored the condition of all the levees to ensure if an evacuation was necessary, there would be sufficient time to coordinate the evacuation of citizens to a safe area. He coordinated with the Douglas County Department of Roads and Nebraska Department of Roads to block access leading to the flooded areas. He also recorded the DCSO law enforcement services provided to the natural disaster. Due to his meticulous records, the DCSO has requested over $20,000 in reimbursement from the federal government. When the floodwaters eventually blocked all exit routes from the cities of Waterloo and Valley, there were calls to evacuate the Elkhorn branch command center, which was located inside the Waterloo Fire Department. Based on the fact that there were still emergency rescues being performed and there was still a need for emergency law enforcement services, Sergeant Owens opted to remain in the flood zone. Sergeant Owens spent over 36 continuous hours at the beginning of this natural disaster in the flood zone. If you remember, he had to get helicoptered out of the zone when this all happened. The DCSO and the citizens of Western Douglas County are very fortunate to have a dedicated professional in Sergeant Tim Owens. It is for these reasons that I, Captain Wayne Hudson, is submitting Sergeant Owens for a certificate of appreciation and ask that he be considered for Deputy of the Year. Thank you. Great job.
Come on by, I want to shake your hand. Very much so.
Good job. Thanks, Sir Owens.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Captain Hudson, appreciate it. And again, thank you all for your service and the work during this period and continued service as the cleanup continues to happen. Appreciate it. And with that, unless you want to stay for the meeting, you're all good. Commissioner Boyle.
I just want to make one quick comment. Commissioner Borgeson and I were back at a White House conference last week, and FEMA representatives were there, and both Commissioner Borgeson and I cornered him and talked to him about what was going on, and I was quite surprised. He was pretty well informed about what had happened, not only in Nebraska, but specifically in eastern Nebraska. So we're in touch with them, and if you have any problems beyond what the normal, or even the normal problems, give us a call here at the Civic Center. The number is 444-7025. Ask for me or Mary Ann, and we'll try to help whatever way we can. We have this fellow's email and his personal phone number. So keep up the good work. We're all very proud of you. Thanks.
With that, we'll go on to, we're going to go to item C under the Board for the Child and Youth Services Committee meeting, item 1, which is the Douglas County Youth Center's monthly report. Right.
Good morning, Commissioners. Brad Alexander, Douglas County Youth Center. Thank you for juggling your schedule around a little bit for us to accommodate the presentation this morning. We're going to start with Lindsay. Come on. Can you help me get this up? I'm not seeing anything on the screen. Lindsay is with Lutheran Family Services, and they provide a crisis response team here in Douglas County, and she's going to spend some time along with some folks from Region 6 to provide you some information about the program and the services that they offer. You're probably better at this than I am. There we go. Lindsay.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Lindsay Kroll with Lutheran Family Services. I'm the director of our Urgent and Crisis Services. Mark and Brad asked me to come and do a quick presentation about our crisis response programs that we have in Douglas County. So I've quite a bit of information, so I'll kind of breeze through it a little bit, but feel free to ask questions. So, yes?
Is that on, do we have a copy of that so we can read it?
No, I didn't print a copy, sorry.
Oh, okay.
But you can get us one.
I'm happy to
Okay.
give you a copy, yes.
Can you, Liz, just before you go, so when I talked to Brad, this is the heart of their report today. If you got any questions for them on the regular handouts, they can answer those, but this is what they want. We want the heart of that today's to be for question and answer, so I just want to make sure.
Okay, great. So with Lutheran Family Services, we have a crisis response program that has several different components. We have a mobile crisis team, which is a 24/7, 365 days a year program that is staffed by licensed mental health professionals that cover all of Douglas and Dodge and Washington counties, assisting law enforcement in the community. Can't hear me, sorry.
No, you want to adjust the mic so we
Oh,
can hear
okay.
you.
Didn't understand the hand movement, sorry. So we assist law enforcement in the community when they're working with individuals in some sort of mental health crisis. The purpose of the program is to really divert from hospitalization, incarceration, keep individuals in the community and community-based services to help them get their needs met in a way that doesn't involve either jail or hospital. We also have a peer support service that is through the Omaha Police Department. We have someone with lived experience with mental illness that is housed at headquarters down here that assists individuals who may be calling 911 more frequently and helping them getting their needs met in a different manner. We also have a co-responder program, which I'll go a little bit more further in depth at a later slide. These are therapists that are also licensed mental health clinicians that are housed within the police precincts within Omaha. They respond to calls for service coming in through 911 with the officers and provide that similar intervention that the mobile team does. This is just a simple list of different kinds of calls that we respond to. There's really not a bad call for us to respond to. We respond to all ages. The youngest client we've served in this program has been 3 years old, and the eldest client has been 98, so we're everywhere in between. We respond to calls, maybe someone's depressed, stating they're suicidal, or experiencing some sort of psychosis, so they're hearing things, seeing things that are not there. Maybe they've experienced a traumatic event and they're not coping well with that. So really kind of any reason law enforcement would like us to respond on scene, we're happy to do that to provide that intervention. Our mobile team and peer support team is funded through Region 6 Behavioral Health Care. Our co-responder program, which started as a pilot, is funded by private donors in the community, different foundations. So what we do on a call, we get there pretty quickly. Our average response time in Douglas County is 19 minutes. So this is from when an officer calls us, we get in our cars and we head out to the scene within Douglas County, and we get there as quickly as we possibly can, 24/7. We meet with the officer, kind of get an idea of what's going on with that individual, and then we start building rapport, doing active listening, engaging in any sort of de-escalation that we can with those individuals in crisis. Often it's, one individual, or it could be a family dynamic, so depending on who's present, we are happy to kind of address all needs for those individuals at that time. We obtain basic information, do a brief mental status exam, get some mental health history, current symptoms they may be experiencing, really if they have any criminal history, drug use, medical history. We're really trying to be able to paint a picture of what could be encouraging the behavior in that moment. So is this a medical reason that they're maybe experiencing psychosis, maybe an untreated medical issue that could cause that, but it looks like mental health? Is this a substance use issue that's causing the behavior? What's really behind this? So we can best assess that and provide intervention at that time. Our goal is to be there on site for about 20 minutes. We really try hard to get law enforcement back into service as quickly as possible. So that's really our goal that we aim for. We do a suicide screening as well as assess for any homicidality or any what I would consider someone to be gravely disabled due to their mental illness. So we assess every individual for those things when we're on the scene with them. We currently use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. This is a scale that's been normed across many different organizations and entities. They use this severity scale in the hospital system. First responders often use this scale, so we're all kind of speaking the same language when it comes to suicide assessment. What we really see for a lot of folks is a lot of isolation. You know, maybe they lost their job, they lost their insurance, they can't afford medication, their symptoms start coming back, and their life is kind of falling apart. So we really come in and provide this intervention to keep people out of the hospital, out of the jail, and get some stability under their belt. As far as disposition for calls that we go on, most of the folks that we intervene with stay in the community. They stay in their homes, they stay in their shelter, wherever they're at that we meet with them, they typically remain in the community. If we do feel that someone meets involuntary commitment, we will make that recommendation to law enforcement for an emergency protective custody placement or a civil protective custody placement, depending on what they're presenting with. That ultimate decision is law enforcement's decision. Master's level clinicians are not recognized as mental health professionals by state statute to be able to do that involuntary commitment. So we provide that recommendation to first responders, and they take it from there. We obviously support individuals seeking hospitalization if it's warranted and they want to take that step. We will support them in getting to the hospital. Certainly if there's any medical issues, we will encourage that step. We do a lot of safety planning with people, really removing any sort of means to access guns, prescription medications, things that could be used for harming themselves. We really work a lot to prevent access to those means. Region 6 has been able to provide us with, I'll change the slide here, a couple of different opportunities for that, such as prescription lock boxes and gun safes or trigger locks that we will often give to people in the community. If that's really kind of an identified risk for that family in that home, we will provide some means to restrict access to those things in order to keep those folks in the home safely. So we are able to do that very effectively and then link people to resources. Part of our program is our post-crisis services. So individuals that we come in contact with through our crisis response program, they have access to our 90-day stabilization program. And that includes behavioral health therapy, medication management, and then we subcontract with Salvation Army to provide emergency community support, which is that kind of case management service to help with those basic needs. Therapy sounds wonderful, but if I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight or where my next meal is going to come from, it's really not going to be that effective. So we're able to provide these resources for folks immediately. There's not a wait list for them. The Emergency Community Support Program can come and meet with them in their home within 24 to 48 hours and really help building that stability for individuals or families. Just a little bit about our peer support specialist. Again, this is an individual with lived experience. Currently at the Omaha Police Department Central headquarters. She fields a lot of phone calls coming in from the telephone reporting unit, people walking into headquarters, really helping individuals get connected with resources instead of continuing to call 911 for more behavioral health related needs that don't require that level of response. So she's a busy lady handling a lot of those calls. So our co-responder program, this is fairly new, but it is expanding. We currently have a full-time therapist in the Southwest Precinct within OPD, a full-time therapist within the Northwest Precinct in OPD. We are working to, I have 3 positions I'm currently hiring for Northeast, Southeast Precincts, and then Douglas County Sheriff's Office as well. So hoping in the next couple months we will get those positions filled. The difference between the co-responder program and our mobile program is that these therapists are embedded in the department. So they are sitting in Sergeant's Bay right next to officers, sergeants. They're watching the system that 911 calls come into. So they're seeing immediately alongside officers, listening to the radio, the calls that are coming in, and they're responding right away. So their average response time is around 7 minutes. So they're responding at the same time as officers, really decreasing that time spent waiting for a therapist to get there. So they're able to go on more calls because they do more self-dispatching. It's not really officers' discretion to then call the mobile team to come out. So they essentially go on more calls because they just radio in and say, show me en route, and they head on their way to provide that intervention. They do more of a proactive outreach as well, so maybe the folks that are utilizing 911 more heavily in their area, they will go and reach out to them weekly, check in with them, see if there's anything that they can do to help them meet their needs pre-crisis, if you will. So really the purpose of the program is to reduce calls to law enforcement due to mental illness, really providing that right intervention at the right time, getting people's behavioral health needs addressed right away, linking individuals to resources, getting them connected with providers to really further prevent any sort of system of care involvement, providing input to officers on disposition and decision process for the involuntary commitments, ensuring safety for individuals experiencing crisis, for their families as well, that diversion piece I mentioned, and then improving individuals' ability to handle crisis. So we do survey everybody that we come in contact with. We follow up with them within 24 hours and 30 days. Any day of the week we do this, and just check in with them, make sure that they're still doing okay. So there is more of a wraparound approach to that. It's not just a one-time intervention. 84% of individuals that we surveyed in 2018 reported being better able to deal with their crisis because a crisis response therapist was involved in that intervention. Just some brief statistics for you. January 1st, 2018 to January 1st of 2019, we responded to 644 calls. Of those, 221 were the co-responder team. We had 53 EPCs, so we were looking at a 91% diversion rate. So of those calls we went on, only a handful of them needed to be EPC'd in that moment. We served 82 youth in that time frame as well. I did pull some recent stats this morning. So January 1st until the end of June of this year, our mobile team responded to 323 calls. 54 of those were youth calls. We had 27 EPCs and 0 arrests. For our co-responder program, for the first 6 months of this year, they had 342 calls. 39 of them were youth. They had 12 EPCs and 5 arrests based on those interventions. So our call volume is getting greater, which is wonderful because we're providing more intervention to more folks. So that's what I got for you in a nutshell, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of this as well.
Okay. So let me, I failed to give, we failed to give some context at the beginning of this. So
Yeah.
Brad and Mark had approached us, Commissioner Borgeson, and Commissioner Borgeson knew about it from the Region 6 work. So I think Mark Brad had a conversation with Patty Jerkovich. We had a brief meeting to kind of get an idea of where they wanted to go with this. They facilitated a meeting that the county attorney hosted 2 weeks ago with a lot of the stakeholders on the juvenile side. From Brad and Mark's conversation, they thought, based on the work that had been done, there are a lot of kids sitting in there that this preventative step would help, so those kids would not be in detention. They probably wouldn't even need to be there with this service. Hopefully they can get the intervention and the family front services up front. So based on that, they had been planning to get everything together to make the presentation to the board. So that's that fair context-wise in this? Yes. So with that, you do have a couple of questions on that. Commissioner Kraft and Commissioner Kavanaugh. And no two for the board. Patty Jerkovich is here, Region 6, to answer anything from that point of view that she can answer in that respect.
Am I to understand right, when needed, you provide the medications?
People can access our post-crisis services if they choose to upon that first initial crisis response intervention. So they have to come in for an appointment, see a provider. We don't pay for medications, but we do get them access to a provider quickly.
To a provider who will, if they have no money, find a way to give it to them, correct?
Yep, we're a Region 6 funded service, so we will assist them either through samples or prescription assistance.
And are any of your volunteers or employees APRNs?
We do not have, well, for the mobile team, for our crisis response program, no, they're all licensed mental health clinicians.
Okay.
On the post-crisis side for medications, yes, they are prescribers.
And at this time, you have one peer support specialist?
Correct.
How many do you actually need?
That's a good question. She's very, very busy. I would love to see the peer support be involved more on the crisis side to respond in the community, because I think that there's real value in having someone who understands what you're going through to assist you in those needs. So to give you a number, more than one, for sure.
And
Is the peer support specialist a paid position?
Yes, it is.
Good. Does the crisis response team, other than Region 6, does it receive any money from Douglas County?
No, I do
Okay.
not believe so. No.
I don't have any other questions at
Okay.
this time. Thank you, sir. By the way, thank you.
You're welcome.
This report was very informative. I hope the World Herald will do a 10-page spread on it. At least a 2-page spread.
When you say, clarify the money part that
Yes.
Commissioner Kraft just asked, because you do get money for Region 6.
Our mobile team and our post-crisis services and our peer support services are all funded through Region 6 Behavioral Health Care.
So when you say Douglas County, it's not, by the funding we get through Region 6, is it fair to say that there is some play with the county?
There could be.
Okay. All right, just want to make that sure.
Sorry, thanks for the clarification.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Sorry, I missed your name at the beginning.
Lindsay Kroll,
And you're the executive director, is that right?
Director, yes.
Yeah. Thanks for coming down today. What's your annual budget for this?
Geez, off the top of my head, I didn't prepare that for you, I apologize.
Do you have an approximate number?
Maybe Patty could better tell me. Do you know that? For the mobile team, do you know the budget off the top of your head?
Patty Georgievich, Region 6 Behavioral Health Care. I don't know what the total budget is for the program, but I can tell you, we are, in this current fiscal year, there's about $700,000 that we have allocated for both the crisis response piece of it as well as the post-crisis services.
And that would be for this program?
That is for the crisis response for both, for Douglas, Dodge, and Washington counties.
And that's a service area of this program, pretty much, isn't it? Yeah. I think that you, thank you. I think that you mentioned this is mixed funding of public and private sources, is that right?
Our co-responder program that we started as a pilot that's now getting more sustainability, that is through funders in the private sector.
Okay. And what's the budget on that?
Last year, we got $120,000 to start the pilot to fund 1.5 positions.
Okay.
So we're looking to expand that, like I said, adding a provider in each of the precincts in Omaha as well as Douglas County, so.
Okay. And that was a year ago when this began?
Beginning of 2018.
Okay. Is that going to transition into this overall program eventually? Is that the plan?
Yeah, we currently we're working with the Behavioral Health Support Foundation as well as the Kim Foundation to really expand this as well as other funders in the community. So there will be funding, I believe, through the city budget as well over the next 5-year period to fund those co-responders in the Omaha Police Department.
Okay.
That's been through the city council budget, I believe, as well.
So the crisis response program itself, how long has that been running?
The crisis response program started in 2008 in Dodge County, and then we expanded into Douglas and Washington in 2010. Our program does respond to all area homeless shelters as well. I neglected to mention that, as well as to families through the Nebraska Family Helpline. So we do respond to those entities as well.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Mark, can I ask you to come up and respond? Just to make sure where we are next step. So from the meeting we had the other day, and the presentation from the law enforcement from SARP, Chief Smarter was there, Deputy Chief Gray was there. I guess right now our next steps are trying to get together to work, because SARP and Douglas are whole different in volumes, but we're trying to get together to see how do we tie all this together, what capacity is needed, and how do we get it implemented right.
Yes, those conversations are still ongoing. We've been in communication both with Chief Smarter and Deputy Chief Gray. And, you know, OPD has already made a commitment with regards to crisis response by adding staff and being prepared for some of the mental health challenges. Our overall goal initially was to hopefully be able to use the program more for our juvenile population. which is the case for Sarpy County, as was reported on that informational session, where the requests can come in directly for youth. And the big advantage of that is, as Lindsay stated, it gave law enforcement the opportunity to not book individuals, and they had the opportunity to receive services within the community, and that's vital. As you know, this came as a result of a parents' meetings that we've been conducting since January, and parents have been saying that they need a different pathway for some of their behavioral issues with families and some of their initial mental health concerns. And provided that law enforcement makes a request to Lutheran Family Service, that's been the pathway of actually being able to access the services. The process has to be a request from law enforcement.
Okay. Commissioner Morgan.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Lindsay, when you talked about your funding, have you called on the hospitals, the charitable organizations that pay no real estate taxes in our community to possibly participate in this program over the last, I guess, 11 years that you've been in existence?
I don't know if we've committed a formal ask to those entities. With our expansion of our co-responder program, we are looking at all sorts of opportunities for funding.
I would think they'd want to participate in your program, and because they are charitable, it'd be nice to make that call, and you might let us know how that goes.
Okay.
We see them spending millions on advertising nightly, so if we could get that participation, I think this is an important program, and that would be helpful. So at some point, you might let us know that in an email or whatever you'd like.
Okay. Will
All
do.
right.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
Yeah,
Thank you for what you do.
So, Lindsay, let me ask you, when you say director, are you the new head?
What do you mean by that? We've had some shifting of seats within our organization. But,
Okay.
so I'm the director of the urgent and crisis services. So I oversee the entire crisis response continuum.
Okay.
Yes.
I got it.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Duda?
I just want to briefly thank you for what you're doing. I mean, as criminal justice continues to grow, ever expanding, stressing our budget, stressing court, stressing jail, we're finally getting smarter about helping people. And the recognition that, you know, for some people, there's better things to do than throw them in jail, more appropriate, more helpful. Thank you so much for doing what we all have always known ought to be done, and it's wonderful to see it finally getting done.
Thank you.
Okay. Think you're good? Thanks. So, Brad, you want to briefly go through the report and go from there? I saw you give them out, but I haven't seen them flow down.
Did you hand those out? Sorry.
Okay.
Oh. All right, we'll move quickly. We'll start on slide number 3. So in 2019, we've had 5 students that have earned their diplomas. We currently have 2 students that are receiving or working towards college credits with Metro Community College. Again, a wonderful partner, waived tuition and books, and the hope is that the kids will continue their education once they leave us, and there'll be some opportunities that they may have not otherwise had. Then on to slide number 5, please. Parent-Teachers Conference, last held in May, 30 parents participated. That's a 45% participation rate for a Parent-Teachers Conference. I think that's pretty good. We've got the next one scheduled for September of 2019. Slide number 7, please. And yeah, the the presentation you just heard, it had been going on for a while, but it was one of those things that was kind of sparked out of the parents' meeting, and Mark really took that to heart and has done a lot of work to pull this together and help us to learn more about what Lutheran Family Services is doing, and we appreciate that. The parent-teachers meeting is something that allows us to receive feedback, or parents' meeting is something that allows us to receive feedback from the parents. And so in that effort, we are working with Qualtrics to develop actually 3 tools, and they will be ready by the beginning of the school year. So we're going to start analyzing and evaluating the parents' responses in terms of how reentry is going. Are they comfortable with the reentry plan? Did they feel like they had an opportunity to participate in the process? The information that they received from the courts, was it available? Was it accessible? Did they understand it? Were they informed? And then, of course, with the youth center, were they made aware of the services that we offer? Are there things that we should be doing that we're not doing? Just helping us to do a better job to the extent that we can. That's what we want to do. Last meeting was held in July. We thought we were going to do a better job of accommodating parents, so we held that in the evening. And it was our lowest attendance that we had. We had one parent show up. But we're going to do that again in August, and we'll have another evening meeting. And if we continue to see that same trend, because during the day we have, 5, 6, 7?
Yeah, between 4 and 6.
Yeah. And so we had a better participation, at least from what we can tell right now, when we had them during the day. So if that's the case, obviously we'll move them back to the day. But we're trying to accommodate their schedules. Slide 10. The Girl Scouts had been with us for quite a while, and then they had some issues with staffing and so forth, and they had a Girltopia program at the youth center working with our girls, and that hasn't been there since January of 28. They're coming back. They're going to start in August, August 20th actually. Life skills, effective communications, and problem-solving skills. So we're looking forward to having them back with us at the youth center. Slide 11. Commissioner Kraft asked that we add the actual numbers, not just the forecasted numbers. So you see that on the far right of your handout. So the actual admissions through the end of June was 498, and if you forecast that out, you'll see that right to the left. That's 996. The ADP, the average daily population and average length of stay, those in either one of those that you look at, those are actual numbers. 80 average daily population, 27 average length of stay. Then on to slide number 16, please. So this is the average length of stay for those youth that are with us for over 24 hours. And historically, that's how we had tracked it only. But we're including the kids that have been with us less than 24 hours now. So that 27-day number that I just showed you, that's an overall number, includes both the kids that were with us less than 24 hours and those that were with us longer than 24 hours. But the average length of stay for those not on probation, 43 days probation, 40 days adult court, 84, and then the overall length of stay for kids that are with us over 24 hours is 44 days. The next slide, slide 17, this is the people that are with us for less than 24 hours. So when you see the number of juveniles not on probation, and you look over to the average, which is a per month average, that's not hours, that's the actual number of kids. So on average, those that are not on probation, we receive 20 of those a month who stay with us less than 24 hours. Less than 1 who are on probation, 2.6 for adult court, and then the overall length of time that they're with us is 3.8 hours. Slide number 18, the next slide, please. So again, you got the actual numbers on the right hand of the handout, and then the forecasted numbers are directly to the left of that. So 184 adjudicated youth, 255 pre-adjudicated youth, 56 pretrial, those would be in adult court, sentenced 3, total 498. We've seen an uptick in the kids that are coming in on adult charges. I wasn't going to include this slide, but I think I will just to make that one point. So if you go to slide number 19, you can see, and this is a rolling calendar, so it takes it is reporting the previous 12 months. So if you see the pretrial numbers, 7 in January, 3 February, March 7, April 5, and then 18 in May, 16 in June. That 18 number there, that would have been from July of 2018, not July of 2019. But at least the last couple of months, we've seen an uptick in the kids that are in adult court. I think we've got 31 kids that are in adult court, 18 solely in adult court, and then 13 that are in both adult and juvenile court. Slide number 20, please. And there's a classification of admissions, so clearly when they come to us, when they show up at our door, most of them are actually delinquents in juvenile court. Misdemeanors 8, felonies 55. What happens is they may move to adult court after they started with us. So this is just reporting where they were at when they showed up at our door at admissions. And then the actual numbers that Mark provided to me this morning were where they're at currently in the court system. Slide number 24, please. So the reasons for admissions, the numbers in parentheses are the actual numbers, and then the percentage. So the new charge is 65% of our kids are showing up with new charges. 31% are probation involved, whether it's a capias for unlawful absence or a violation of probation. And then the juvenile court holds 1%, failure to appear in juvenile court 4%, failure to appear in county court. There was actually 2 kids, but it didn't show up in terms of the percentage. Slide 25, please. And so of those 294 that came in on new charges so far this year, this is how at least the top 11 offenses that we see coming in our door. Robbery continues to lead the way at 19%. Assault and domestic assault, 14%. Possession of controlled substance with intent to deliver, 9%. Theft by unlawful taking, 9%. Theft by receiving, 8%. Terroristic threats, 6%. That's kind of cut off, I apologize, but that's unlawful occupancy, 5%. Gun charges, 4%. Burglary and attempted burglary, 4%. Accessory to a felony, 3%. And sexual assault, 3%. Slide number 26, admissions by race. Again, we're reporting the actual numbers on the far right. So African Americans, the actual number through the end of June of this year was 264. That would represent 54% of our admissions. Caucasians, 112 or 23% of our admissions. Hispanic/Mexican, 92 or 19%. Native American, 10, 2%. Asian, 11, 2%. Slide 28, please. The home program, once again, the actual numbers are on the far right. We've admitted 102 youth through the end of June, 47 successful completions, and our average daily population for that program is 30. Slide number 30. The credits that the kids have earned at the youth center through the end of June, the actual numbers are 383 and 78, 383 full credits and 78 partial credits. Forecasting out would be 761 and 156, so pretty close to where we were at in 2018. Slide 32. Individual education plans, the kids that show up that have IEPs or individual education plans. Actual numbers are 79, and the kids, of those 79, 49 had been with us previously, so that's a recidivism rate of 50%.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Of the 79 that have showed up with IEPs, 40, or almost 50%, have been with us previously. Slide 36, please. Medical mental health, so the kids that have been seen by the nurse, the actual number is 1,372, 953 mental health or crisis interventions, and 475 have spent time with our pediatrician or practitioner. Slide 38. And here, again, are the medications that they're on, and as I reported last time, we added the average, the monthly average, so the psychotropics leads the way at 14, followed by antidepressants at 13, asthmatics at 9, stimulants at 8, but those are the medications that our young people are taking while they're at the youth center, the most prominent ones anyway. 39, and here are the psychiatric diagnosis, and I won't read all of those, but you can see substance abuse disorder, and I think it was Commissioner Boyle asked us to report out what kind of substances those are, and you'll see that on the next screen. So we'll move to slide 40. So of the 21 that had some issues with substance abuse, cannabis was the most popular at 16, and then followed by meth at 5, and the mental health people that reported this out were actually kind of surprised that they didn't see any what am I trying to say? Yeah, prescription drug use or cocaine. Oftentimes they see those, but just in this our first look at the reasons for substance abuse, it wasn't there this time. Then the next slide, 41. Sexually transmitted diseases, again, the actual numbers far right, 317 youth were tested, and of those 317, 26 tested positive. And so that's 8% of those tested were testing positive. And that is my report for July.
You want to, Greg, go?
Yep.
Good morning. Excuse me. Greg Hepburn, Expediter, Douglas County Youth Center. Just for the expediting report that I typically give, I've added about 4 columns to it. First one is the Health and Human Services and how many youth receive services from them. Second is charges of juvenile, adult, and distinguishing whether they have one.
Wait, Greg, go back.
Yes.
Where is that?
That is
okay,
the...
all right. After zip code?
Yes, under, yep, after zip code. And so it's the next 2 that follow were also added. Probation status, whether they're pre-adjudicated or they're currently being supervised. And then the other column I added on here was, it's the last column in the charges-related information, and it is the violent charges of youth that were charged with a violent crime. So just some general information. They're currently, and the report is front and back as well. Sorry, I didn't add that. There are 7 youth in there who currently receive HHS services. Also notable is the number that are waiting evals, and that number is at 7. So that number is actually gone down quite considerably over the past couple of months. Currently have 9 youth in there with waiting violation of probation, 10 under that are there for juvenile capias. And then another thing that excuse me, kind of stood out to me is that since July 1st, the youth that are in there at a glance right now, 11 out of the last 24 youth are there under new charges, which is something that we spoke briefly about and kind of anticipated that may be a trend at some point. Didn't expect it quite this soon, and don't know, where that's going to go next, but just thought that was something that would be notable.
Say that again, Greg. How do I see that?
So it's the last, so starting at July 7th.
Okay.
And then continuing all the way down from that point.
And then there's a new charges category in the charge-related information section.
All right, because I don't see a July, okay, never mind. Okay, got it,
From that point, and then the rest are on the back.
got it.
So, and I apologize about the voice. I'm getting over bronchitis, so bear with me a little bit. But so those are the general things that stood out to me. Always things in terms of charge related. At a glance, there are 15 youth that are there, 13 of which are new charges, and 2 of which are violation of probation that are gun-related charges. In terms of assaults, from 1st through 3rd, there's 8, and then in terms of robbery, a total of 15, 2 of which are there in violation of probation, but for robbery with use of weapon.
All right, we got three questions, General. Commissioner Kavanaugh, Kraft, and then Boyle.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I'll live.
All right. Thanks for this. A couple things would be helpful. There's a lot of abbreviations on here, VOP, JC, UNLAB, and to a layperson, that's incomprehensible. It would be helpful if perhaps you could have a index of terms that you're using.
And I do, I'm mean to cut you off, I do, but I'm having difficulties having that added onto there, so maybe I'll just have something that
Sure,
comes
separate
as an
page or
agenda
whatever,
form,
I
just
mean,
sort of
so that we can read along. UNLAB is what?
unlawful absence.
Okay. That means they missed an appointment or something, or they're not where they're supposed to be?
They're not where they're supposed to be, they're not, so typically at a placement, and they've absconded from there.
And we have a readmit column. Explain that.
Readmit, so if they've been to, it's a recidivism, if they've been to the youth center before or not, that's a yes or no.
Okay. You know, that's a real important metric in terms of success or failure of the system, or, you know, how we're working, because if we could quantify that maybe at the end so that we know that that recidivism rate is running at X%, that would be helpful.
Sure.
The other metrics that you have, race and gender, you know, percentage breakouts on those, again, helpful. I think that we know from seeing the director's overall report the general trend, but it should be maybe at the end of one of these columns, or X% of this and X% of that.
Absolutely. More of a at a glance. Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Commissioner Kraft.
One quick question. This is for Brad. At the career fairs, you had 14 participants. Do you follow the participants, okay, Mark, do you follow the participants after they've gone to the career fair to see whether or not they've been offered a job or have accepted a job?
Yeah, we refer individuals that, well, all the individuals that come through, if they're there long enough, we get them registered through the Heartland Workforce Solutions. So they have a variety of different step-up programs. With regards to the last career fair, all of those individuals also went through the step-up. As you recall, the last one was kind of split half and half, agency as well as employer. The one that we're having September 20th is the one where it's just the employer. And it's our effort to make sure that folks are filling out the application for places. But I can't quantitatively say how many have reached employment. We can't control how long our individuals are there, but they are provided with the contact information on how to reach those individuals once they're released.
That might be a good follow-up project for a graduate student or someone.
Yes, we have some interns that we're looking at where that could potentially fit in their will well.
Okay. I don't have any other questions.
Commissioner Boyle?
You know, the new plan is to have a group of programs that will reduce the number dramatically of individuals who are in your custody. And I've got a question. I'd like to know, and you can't do it today, but I'd like you to analyze all the young people who are on this list and tell us what program they would be in under the coming system, if you're able. Are you aware of, I mean, I'm not sure that I am totally, but are you aware of the new programs that are coming down the pike to reduce the numbers?
Certainly, we would work to provide that to you. I think we would have to work with probation to make that happen. I mean, they're the ones that are finding the.
Well, when I look at these, you know, I look at the charges, quite a few are quite serious, assault, sexual assault, and all sorts of things, and robbery and possession of a stolen firearm and things like that. I don't know if those young people are candidates for these programs that are being installed, and that's kind of it's a very serious component to driving down the population, obviously.
Sure. I mean, we don't know. I mean, it's going to take time to actually figure that piece out.
You know,
but, you know, the Charles Drew edition actually coming up at the youth center, once that is finalized, that gives us access where we can refer individuals when they first arrive with Charles Drew staff, their licensed mental health practitioners, and that full-time navigator that will be at the youth center. The purpose, one of those responsibilities would be meeting with those new individuals when they first arrive and having the ability to figure out what type of resources may be needed once they leave. And so that's, we're developing that contract now, but Charles Drew certainly will figure in quite prominently in our plans moving forward, as well as having the psychiatric piece with UNMC. We're already seeing results of that with getting some evals back sooner and making recommendations for placement, which we're very pleased with. But the next step, as we talked about before, is adding the Creighton team with regards to additional psychiatric support. You know, we're hoping to, once that's completed, to get evals and assessments done actually at the youth center and get those back to the court within the requested 21-day time frame. So there's a lot of things that we have on our map where we're going, that we're really counting on making a difference with our length of stay as well as our overall population. But we just got off the starting gates, so we'll know more as we get down the road.
Commissioner Boyle,
I understand.
can I add one piece of that?
What's that?
Can I add one piece of that?
Sure.
There's a meeting that's been going on. It's getting a little more intense now and adding relative people where it's what they say probation would have to be involved. A lot of that is a meeting with probation. Judge Kaler as presiding judge, Don, it's people from the public attorney's office now to kind of gather to work with how do we start drawing down the $5 million and start talking about the programming that is needed from that piece from probation. So that discussion is happening. Hopefully sometime around September or October we'll have a plan on how to go about that. So that's, in addition to what they're saying, that's some of the remaining action on the programming piece to see what's needed, how to let that start flowing.
Well, I appreciate that, but when I look at, to me, there's a real disconnect with what, I understand the great plans and all the rest and the Charles Drew, and those things are very good, great, and all the psychiatric care that's coming and all the rest. And people are very serious about it. But when you talk about referring people to Charles Drew for psychiatric care and other social services, I mean, if I start, I'll read about the top 10 off that list. You know, the first young man is 16, and his charge is robbery. The next one is assault, discharging a firearm. Another one's assault, use of a deadly weapon. Another one's discharging a fire alarm in an occupied building. Assault, first degree, hold for SARP, robbery times 2, I guess, robbery, possession of a handgun, theft by receiving and discharging a firearm, unlawful possession of a firearm, robbery. I mean, I'm really concerned. It sounds like the programs that we're trying to put together, to me, there's a disconnect. It's like we're dealing with kids that got in a fist fight at the junior high, but that's not on here. And
Those typically may be the youth that fall into that less than 24-hour
Yeah.
range. And
see, those are the kids I would see going to Charles Drew and getting all this social work.
that's part of the plan
Okay,
as well.
Okay,
with
well,
those
you see,
24
let me
hours.
ask you a question. The first young man is 16. He's being charged as an adult. Probation status is pre-adjudication, and his charge is assault, discharging a firearm. Now, is he a candidate for one of these programs you talked about?
To be honest, we wouldn't know until the meeting actually occurred. And, you know, for us, we never know what's behind the story for someone that comes to us. So we're starting from, you know, kind of what we get from arrival. But the hope is that, yes, there could be some assistance that could potentially assist and help down the road. That's the hope.
Okay.
That's a probation question, all right?
Yes,
So,
sir.
Mike, if you want, we have to ask probation to come and peel that back, because that's not their call.
Correct.
That will be probation and the meetings that they have with them and the judge is to see what the next step is. So that would be a probation call for what they can say on it. And if we need, we can ask them to come down next time with Greg to go do that.
Please do.
Okay.
Well, let me ask a couple of questions. I mean, on here too, I have I don't know what the solution is, but I think when we try to impose requirements on all of these young people, I'll put it that way, I think we're being unrealistic. They're coming, you know, they've had some problems, you know, getting where they are. Some problems have led to that. It could be, and I think the basis is poverty. But we put them on probation, and it just doesn't seem to fit. And so then there's a violation of probation. And then I see capias on here quite a few times, so I assume that's for violation of probation.
Yes.
And it puts them on a path to failure. And, I mean, I don't know how, I mean, I assume you're sending them texts and so forth and saying, show up at the court. Well, I don't know if that happens. Sometimes it doesn't happen. I really am real concerned that our solution is almost elitist. It's a system that doesn't fit the lifestyle and the culture of most of these young people, and that's not their fault, it's not our fault, but there's, to me, a real disconnect, and I'm really concerned about them. I think they're, you know, there's so many with new charges, and I don't know, they're awfully young. They're still 16 or so, and a few of them are 17, 15-year-old down here. But, I mean, it's a really big issue, you know, and now we're on a path to build a new juvenile facility inside a building across the street, and I started out being concerned about the number of beds and was told, no, we're not going to add beds. Then the cops talked and they added beds, which is fine. You're not an expert unless you're 50 miles from home, I know that. But anyway, I'm really concerned about this, and I think it's a big question in my mind. So you know, I just really, I don't know how I don't think you can really do it, because what I'm asking, I don't think you can do. But all these programs we're talking about putting into place to get the population down, I don't know how that applies to a majority of these young people. That's really where I'm at. And I don't know that you can answer it yet.
Right.
I guess the proof's in the pudding, but by then it'll be too late. Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Just a couple quick questions for the director. Thanks for this report. These are, again, things that we keep coming back to month to month, and you touched on them in your report, but the minority population of the youth center, I think this is number 26 in your presentation. You gave the percentages, but I don't see them.
We can get those added to the
Yeah.
document. Yes.
But could you just reiterate for me real quick what
Yep.
the percentages are there?
Let me get to them here. So, African-American, 54%, Caucasian, 23%, Hispanic/Mexican, 19%, Native American, 2%, Asian, 2%.
So, just to recap, we are at about, I guess, over 75% minority population.
Yes.
That's been pretty constant, majority minority population, as far back as we have numbers, right?
Mhm. Yes, sir.
The other one that we go to is the average daily population. Is it about 80, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. What's the population today?
81.
81? Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you again for adjusting your agenda to accommodate. I appreciate
And
it.
hope everything goes well. Appreciate it. We'll go back up to the beginning of the agenda and the consent agenda. There's 7 items on the consent agenda. What's the will of the board? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, seconded by Commissioner Duda. Please vote. Hold up. Commissioner Kavanaugh.
I think Mr. Leahy is here. We have on the agenda the approval of a lease agreement. I just have a couple of quick questions on that.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jerry Leahy, Public Property.
Mr. Leahy, this agreement, and I looked at it, it goes back, I don't know, almost 20 years, is that right?
It does.
And this facility at 4927 South 24th Street, which is provided for by Douglas County, is used for what?
It's a state of Nebraska food stamp office and a distribution center for HHS.
Okay. And we have been renting this facility since 2001, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And I see.
Commissioner, this is the old, you may remember, this is the old Phillips department store.
I remember it very well.
You remember it well. So, I mean, it served its purpose very well for Douglas County and the state of Nebraska. We actually had an option for another 5 years, but at the request of the state, to looking at some other areas to reduce, which is good for us, into some other buildings that they own. So the one-year extension was actually their request versus renewing a 5-year option. So it probably will work out in our favor. They have another space that they lease within that complex, and they also did a 1-year extension there. So they're clearly on the move. They haven't told me their plan, but I just said, are you sure you can get this done in 1 year? Because I don't want to do a 1 year and come back and try to do 4 more for a higher price, because that's usually what happens. The option that we had for 5 years was the same rent that we're getting for the 1 year for a 5-year extension. They actually wanted more, but we settled at the rate that we would have had if we had done the 5-year. So that's where we're at.
Thank you. So this facility is, we're renting a portion of this facility, is that correct?
6,000 square feet
And what's the overall square footage of the building?
of the building. I don't know, it's
It's
probably in the
substantially
60 to
bigger.
80,000 range. They-
Right.
That area's exploded down there on 24th Street. And, there's parking issues for the clients of the state. And I think that's why they're looking elsewhere.
I understand. So the previous lease that we had was a 5-year term, is that correct?
There's
The
been
lease-
several. There's been
Yes,
several.
I understand, but just the previous one.
Yes,
And what was the monthly payment on that lease?
4,500.
Okay. So over time, do you recall what the initial lease was? If you don't, I mean, I'm not,
I'm going to say 450 a square foot, which almost 20 years later, it's at 10. So I think we're okay.
right.
It's a gross number, so it's not a triple net. So everything is in that gross square foot number.
I understand. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Boyle?
I see that it says that the lease terminates on July 31st, 2020. And I also understand that we have to provide them space for this service, that's correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, I guess, is there any way that we can, I guess there isn't, any way we can absolutely terminate this lease? I mean, we're not going to do this again. I mean, we're kind of at their mercy, aren't we?
Well, I'm hoping that their plan involves a downtown location that they own, and they will willingly move the food stamp office there. And their mail distribution center, which is a good portion of that square footage, would go to Lincoln. So we would be relieved of some obligations that we previously have paid. That's why I say it could be a win-win for Douglas County.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
There's a motion and a second. Consent agenda, please vote.
Oh, yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Come to item 6, which is public hearing. Letter A is budget hearing on adoption of the proposed 2019-2020 Douglas County budget. This is a public hearing, so we will open the public hearing on the budget. First, I'll turn it over to Joe. Do you want to? Oh, there he is. While he's coming again, this is public hearing. We'll officially open the public hearing on the budget.
Yes. So how do we get to get it to the main screen? Okay. Yeah, just hit that. Got it. Thank you. So-
We need Commissioner Boyle.
Okay, got it. Okay, we're going to go through the 2019-2020 budget and ask for approval today.
State your name.
Oh, Jill Lorenz, County Finance Director. So first of all, this chart shows what the annual property tax levy has been over the past 10 years, and it's been unchanged for the past 6 years at 28.059 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. And so this year, the budget contemplates a penny and a half increase in the levy, which equates to a 5.3% increase in the county share of the budget, which for a $150,000 assessed value home would be an increase of $22.50. And the way we did the budget this year is that continuing operations came in and were funded at the consistent level of 28.059 cents. And then there is a penny and a half increase in the levy to fund the expenses associated with the new Juvenile Justice Center. Okay. And then it's better to take a look at this from the perspective of a taxpayer in Douglas County and Omaha, what their total property tax levy would be. And you can see that Douglas County accounts for a little bit under 13% of the total tax levy, with by far the major component being the schools. As you can see in the city of Omaha, for the most part, Omaha Public Schools would account for 56% of the tax levy, by far the lion's share. So a 5.3% increase in the county portion of the levy, when the county portion is just under 13%, equates to a 0.7% increase in the property tax bill for a Omaha resident for this increase in the county tax levy due to the Juvenile Justice Center. Okay. It's kind of the highlights. The proposed budget contains a penny and a half increase in the tax levy and assessed property values to cover the expenses related to the construction of the new Juvenile Justice Center. The budget also assumes a 5.5% increase in total county assessed property values. The total budget came out to $425 million, which is $17.1 million or 2.2% above last year. The budget includes $6.6 million for expenses associated with the new Juvenile Justice Center, and how that's going to be is we're creating a separate fund for that, and that money will be kept separate as a part of the levy, and it will be transparent. So all the costs associated with this Juvenile Justice Center should be funded by that penny and a half in the levy, and like I say, it'll be a separate fund and accounted for separately, so it'll be very transparent. And the remainder of the increase in the overall budget is driven by greater caseloads in the criminal justice system and increased spending for road projects. And increased spending for road projects isn't coming from property taxes, that's generally coming from federal highway and gas tax revenue. So there's a significant increase, but it's not part of the property tax levy. The general fund budget of $215 million is 1.6% above last year, excluding $6 million of one-time expenses in fiscal 18 and 19, which were there to buy the MUD facility, which we were later resold and were compensated the $6 million back by the Public Building Commission. So the remainder of the increases are for corrections, public defender, assessor, register of deeds, and the sheriff's department, who all came in and requested budgets above target. And we had a finance committee meeting and they talked about it, and we were able to fund that within our regular budget amount. And the final hearing regarding the final tax rate and the property tax levy will occur after the final valuation is certified on August 20th of this year. And so we usually approve that in about mid-September. So a little bit of breakout on the penny and a half. The annual debt service on the $114 million bond, which for the first 3 years will be interest only. The way the bonds were originally marketed was coming out to $4.4 million. Of course, that right now is on hold, and there is some risk there that the bonds may have to be remarketed, at which case there is a possibility that interest rates and that expense could go up. There's certain costs not covered by the bond that would have to be borne by the county, $500,000. Then there's the operating cost of the OHA building, which we're going to take over from OHA, I think, very shortly. And we'll have to do some remodeling there and pay the utilities. And there is some discussion of some MUD offices moving there on an interim basis. So we put $500,000 within the budget to fund those expenses. And then there is an operating contingency of $500,000 in there for any costs that may pop up with this project. So the total expense is just under $6 million, and that is what equates to the penny and a half increase in the property tax levy to fund the Juvenile Justice Center. Any questions on that?
We'll wait for you to go.
Okay.
You done?
Nope, a couple more.
Okay.
Okay. Next chart, this is the sources of revenue for Douglas County in the upcoming year. You can see by far property tax is still our largest component, accounting for 43.6% of our total revenue. And you always say that taxes for government are a three-legged stool, where you have income tax, property tax, and sales tax for the county. We operate under the constraint where, in terms of taxing, we're a one-legged stool dependent on property tax. The department revenues that they get for fees and services accounts for about 43% of revenue. So between the property tax revenue and the department revenues, it's 86.6% of our budget is funded by those. Next, I thought I'd give a little breakdown of what we do with inheritance tax and the lottery or Keno transfers then these are the transfers that we use to fund other operations within the county, which are a very important component. As you can see, this year we're going to do $13,225,000 of transfers to fund operations, and the recipients of those transfers are shown below. And the most biggest components are the health center, CMHC, community services, health department, some of the bond funds. So you can see that the inheritance tax remains a very important source of funding for the county and our operations. And I haven't heard of any new legislation with any traction in Lincoln to try and lower the inheritance tax. And this chart just shows how important it is to funding the county operations. And then my last chart is just the change in taxable valuation. So you can see our estimate here is the county would have a total assessed valuation of $46.7 billion, and that is a 5.5% increase over last year. And we'll get the final number on that on August 20th, but I think it'll be pretty close, and that is the valuation increase that the budget is based on. So that's just a quick overview of the budget. We've had some finance committee meetings to discuss this. Like I say, there's a penny and a half for the new Juvenile Justice Center. The rest of it was funded on a constant basis at the old levy. And with that, I would open it up to any questions.
Well, we're going to go. Are there any public comment on it at this period? Please.
Good morning, Doug Kagan, 416 South 130th Street, representing Nebraska taxpayers. Much of the budgetary material we examined during this budget cycle from various departments resembled public relations pieces rather than informative budget material. Understanding that many county employees work at their duties diligently, we were not interested in reading puff pieces. We suggest that county commissioners require of all departments headed by appointees and advise all departments headed by elected officials to use the same template with line items showing specific expenditures for personnel and operations for every department division. I refer you to pages found in the City of Omaha and Omaha Public School District budgets, and I've attached a sample in back there. It was impossible for us to analyze adequately many county department budgets simply because of lack of information available. The total budget would rise by 3%, an understandable percentage, recognizing inflationary higher costs and budgetary demands. So the design and construction of the Justice Center expansion and perhaps a new juvenile detention facility will cause a property tax increase for several years or longer. To counter the fiscal impact of this eventuality, we recommend that county commissioners immediately utilize suggestions from Health Management Associates, which conducted an analysis for the county several years ago, and some from our taxpayer group. The health center has hemorrhaged over $16.8 million taxpayer dollars since 2018. Its budget for fiscal year 2019-2020 is $34.6 million. Cutting costs here could decrease the fiscal impact on county taxpayers from Justice Center expansion or the Juvenile Center expansion. We noticed also at the health center its revenue is way down. Going to page 3, we looked at some of the miscellaneous expenditures of the county just for 3 weeks from the month of June and July this summer, and we noticed that the county can and should reduce or eliminate many unnecessary expenditures, and we've listed a Excel kind of spreadsheet there we'd like you to look at. We think this is a really good place you can cut expenses. So in closing, our further suggestions would be to decrease travel expenses with accompanying costs for lodging and meals, send fewer employees to training workshops and conferences. You can use teleconferencing, for instance. Eliminate step increases in pay and substitute merit pay increases, as some other government subdivisions have done. Purchase equipment and materials through interlocal agreements. Reduce appropriations to the tourism fund and return it to the general fund to reduce budget pressures. Eliminate non-mandated functions, and also shop around for cheaper risk insurance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, Nebraska, 68132. In addition to what Mr. Kagan has presented to you, I'd like to suggest that we think about how we can cut in other ways. Now, the Founding Fathers didn't envision for us to be doing things that families should be doing, schools should be doing, churches should be doing, friends should be doing, volunteer organizations should be doing, with their budgets, not necessarily with their budgets through me, out of my billfold. Property taxes, the federal taxes to 501c3s, and then property taxes at this level, state income taxes at that level, all go to some way or another benefit stakeholders, 501c3s, and people that profess best practices. Now, I would suggest that there's a new stakeholder that ought to be consulted in all of this when we're talking about all of these programs that we're asking for out of my billfold, that really ought to be somebody else's bailiwick, not ours. That's part of the budget on juvenile expenses, which, yes, I agree, we need to do something. The question is who needs to do it and out of whose billfold. Yes, you have separation from the federal Constitution by separation of powers and powers to the states. What's not expressed is yours. But it was nobody's intention to have governments, state, federal, local, or otherwise, providing all these things for children and families. That is something we need to be talking about, how to do that, instead of how to get the money to do that at the juvie center, et cetera. If the best practices have been working over all these years, then why have our incarceration rates keep going up? One big area for cut possibly now is in the juvenile section when just July 1st, state law says we will not incarcerate or detain children 11 or under. You will not detain them. So we ought to be able to slice some budgets today for that program, correct? Then do it before you vote. You don't need for all those kids that have been detained all these years and right now. There shouldn't be anybody in there. But you don't need money for that, correct? It was not the federal government's intention for local governments to provide education and degrees and Girl Scout programs, mental health services, career and jobs. There's other agencies that do that. And there's, again, private sectors ought to be doing that. I'm not a 501c3, but I am a stakeholder because I pay the taxes. I don't rent an apartment. So to sum up, it needs to be a real discussion, not just voting on the dollars for these programs. A real discussion of what they are and who ought to be doing them. Any taxpayer for freedom should be saying that also. Any government representative elected under a system of freedom should be doing that. Cutting the budgets instead of increasing them for programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public?
Somebody left this behind.
Again, anyone else from the public? With that, we'll close the public hearing. Is there action by the board, a motion and a second?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Commissioner Boyle, is there a second? Second by Commissioner Duda. We have discussion, Commissioner Kavanaugh.
It's 10:45. We've been discussing this $425 million plus budget for 15 minutes, and now we're moving to approve it. There have been no public hearings on this. Is that what you're asking for today, Mr. Lorenz, is that we approve this budget right now? Okay. The only departments or elected officials that came before us were those that exceeded the suggested budget increase amount suggested by Mr. Lorenz. I think there were a half dozen of them. And they came forward and testified and justified their requests, and I would move to approve those, I think, 6, possibly 7 budgets. But I would ask that we divide this question so that we can have public hearings on the balance of the budget. This is, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Lorenz, the largest budget in the history of Douglas County.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Yes. And it is a substantial property tax increase as well. Is that right?
I think that's a relative question.
All right, well, the property tax mill levy over the last 10 years has gone from 24.5 to your recommended 29.5. That's a substantial property tax increase. And that's not the end of it, because I think that what your budget is proposing going forward is that we revisit this and raise property tax mill levy again to cover this bond issue. This is an interest-only increase this year, is that right?
There's,
For the bond issue.
For the bond just has interest only for the
Interest
first
only.
2
And why
years.
are we just covering the interest only on the bond issue for the first 2 years?
Because that's how construction projects work in the interim, that they're interest only, and then when operations
Okay.
become in the new facility.
There's no breakout of this budget on any of the backup documents. We don't have a budget actually before us. There was no budget published in the Daily Record, and
Yes,
it's
yes, there
impossible.
was. There is a-
Well, actually, I have it here, and no, it's not. This is not a budget. This is cash expenditures, and I've gone to the budget people on this budget summary, and it's not a budget. But
It's the state
be
requirement.
that as it may, we've had no discussion on any of these categories except for the half dozen departments and elected officials that came before us. And now, with 15 minutes discussion, we're supposed to approve a $425 million property tax increase, which is just the first step of a multiple-step property tax increase that you're proposing. I understand that you don't want to talk about this, but it's going to be talked about here today. For the highest budget in the history of Douglas County and a huge property tax increase, there's no fiscal impact statement in these documents. It doesn't show that. It doesn't show what the increase is in property taxes. It doesn't show what the increase is in valuation. And as a matter of fact, it doesn't take into account the new legislative mandate that says if you're going to predicate your budget on a valuation increase, you must show the public what that valuation increase equals in
We
dollars.
researched that, Commissioner, and this is consistent with the legislation that passed.
Well, in your opinion, but I don't think you went to law school, so your legal opinion is worth not a lot.
You're not our attorney either.
Please, I'm asking
Excuse
everybody.
me, you got time coming, go ahead. We have a budget here before us, which is a record breaker, and a property tax increase to mirror that. I suggest that we divide this question. We take the budget for those 6 departments, possibly 7, that have actually been before us for a public hearing, and we approve that. And then we take into account that we don't even have a valuation until August 20th, and the budget is not due statutorily until September 20th, and we schedule public hearings. We all remember when we had public hearings on all the departments and elected officials. We all should know that every other department of government has public hearings on all of their subdivisions, the state, the feds, the city. We are just trying to do a pig in the poke here on $425 million record-breaking budget property tax increase for no good reason, other than I think we probably are afraid the public might not approve of all of this. So I'd ask that we divide this question, we take up those departments that have had public hearings today, and we lay the rest over for a series of Finance Committee public hearings, which haven't occurred in a couple of years now, on the balance of our departments, and approve those after we have valuation on August 20th.
There's just one question, there's no separate questions. I mean, the budget is one whole question item, there's not separate in there.
Then it's impossible to, in good conscience, vote on a pig in a poke budget tax increase like this. But everyone who does vote yes for this is voting on a massive property tax increase and a record-breaking budget for Douglas County.
Commissioner's time, Commissioner Boyle.
Well, I frankly think, Jim, I'm trying to, I don't really want to respond to you, but I really am offended by the fact that you don't think PJ and I worked on these hearings, and that the work that Joe did and Patrick and others in working with department heads and elected officials, they diligently tried to keep their budgets under the target, and they were successful. And the ones who've had increases were people, offices like the public defender, the county attorney, and the offices where so much justice is handled. I've long held that the state should step in and take over the criminal justice costs for all of the counties. I mean, I know you know that when Don Klein files a case against Nico Jenkins, that we have to pay a filing fee. Think about that. I mean, how outrageous is that? $600,000 in his budget to pay filing fees against people who are accused of serious crimes. I tried several years ago to get that abolished, and the first thing I ran into is that all the money goes to the, with all due respect, to the judge's pension fund. Guess where that ended up? So, as you know, we are a child of the state, and we can only do what the state permits us. You need only look at what the state is doing to Medicaid expansion, which would help us tremendously. They're attempting to carve it into little pieces so it doesn't work. And we, again, are going to be paying more and more bills for health care for people who need help. And the state of Nebraska is jamming it down our throat. Look at La Vista. The mayor there tried to raise the tax on restaurants, you know, I mean, and who cares about it? When you go out to eat, if you're really thinking you can't afford 75 cents on a dollar, then maybe you should stay home or go to McDonald's and pay a dime extra. So anyway, and then interfering in the operations of local government, I think that's really out of this world. Douglas County and county governments, unlike city governments, we are restricted to primarily property taxes for our income. And we can't do anything other than look at property taxes and try our damnedest to keep it down. I live here too. I've got 4 families of children. I've got 16 grandchildren and 8 adult children living in the city who are paying taxes. And they're paying them, they live in good neighborhoods. They've been successful, so they're paying the price. And I guess that's what happens when you're making money. So, I mean, the point is that I take this personally. I know of people in South Omaha who are still paying taxes on their homes, and they don't qualify for homestead exemptions, and they are just really in trouble. And so everything I've looked at, along with Commissioner Morgan and Joe and others who are involved in this, is a way to do this as inexpensively as possible. I mean, it's just the right thing to do. So to suggest that we just whizzed these people through without any contact is, well, it's really offensive. First of all, on the elected officials and department heads who did their very best to not increase their tax. And it's really remarkable that we only had 5 or 6, I'll use Jim's figures, of departments who had to come in and elected officials. But look again at who they were. I mean, it's all the criminal justice people were here. And that's our biggest expense, let's face it. It's, you know, and another big expense, frankly, is the health center. And I know you don't want to go there and look at that. So, you know, we're not talking about closing the Kavanaugh Pavilion, but I mean, there's, after all, you know, that's a big expense too. We could balance the budget if we did something there, Jim, and I know you don't want to, not to get personal, but I know you don't. So, public hearings have been held, and if you didn't attend, that's up to you, but we did. And we talked to the people, all the people who were received letters and said this is what the limit is, and they were successful in making their job work. So anyway, I just really, you know, to characterize this as the biggest tax increase is royally unfair, because if you look back to, you know, you're not giving us any credit for what happened in the past. And if you look at page 2, you'll see that up through from 2010 to 2013, the mill levy was 26.45, and then in 13-14 it went up to 28.5, and it stayed level all those years from 13-14 to 18-19, and that was a Herculean effort on behalf of our finance department, our previous finance guy, our present guy, we're so lucky to have him, and the elected and department heads. So in any event, this is a budget that is as tight as it can get. And I suppose there's, you know, I did add, for example, at the health department, the state of Nebraska cut in the psychiatric section, they cut our peer-to-peer program of people who suffer from mental illness, who've recovered, and coming back to help people who are presently suffering. And the state saw fit to cut those funds. And I made a motion, and it was accepted, that we add $95,000 to the health center's budget so that we could have peer-to-peer counseling. That's an important thing for us to provide. And we're working very hard to try to change things at the Juvenile Justice Center. I'm not totally happy with what's taking place. I never have been much of a fan of the downtown place, and you know that. In the end, I did vote to take the changes that I was able to get and to put those into place. And I've gotten a lot of criticism for doing that, but I think it was the best for the juvenile center and for the taxpayers and the families and our children who need the help. So, sorry to get off on that, but the real question that I had, Joe, was I was
Hey,
curious.
Mike, I'm actually to wrap up.
I will, I'll wrap it up, just let me finish, I'll be done in 2 seconds. I
Well, if
was
you want to wait, you
curious
get another
why you
shot if you want
called
to wait. Mike,
this
you
budget-
get another shot if you want to wait, because there's
I'm just asking why you called it juvenile center and not courthouse juvenile, that's it.
Okay. Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thank you. You know, Mike, I attended all the public hearings that were held on this budget. There weren't very many, but, you know, the point is, those that have had public hearings, the sheriff's office, the Department of Corrections, GIS, Juvenile Assessment Center, Public Defender and County Attorney, I'm for approving that budget today. I attended those hearings, and they made justified claims on what they needed. So what we need to do is have the same level of public scrutiny on the other departments, as we did when I first joined this board, when we had all departments and all elected officials come before the Finance Committee, as the Appropriations Committee in the legislature does and the Congress does, and we reviewed them annually. I think that we're denying all of our elected officials an opportunity to tell the taxpayers how they're spending their money. I know that the taxpayers are being denied the opportunity to ask them how they're spending their money. And it's just, you know, bad practice. I don't think that I can, if we don't do that, in good conscience, support the board's actions to increase taxes, because the Finance Committee has managed the process so poorly that we don't have a budget that is clear and has been vetted by the entire board and by the public. So I'll be voting no on the property tax increase in this proposed budget unless we can have some public transparency and hearings on the guts of this budget. We have 6 departments and elected officials who have come before us. The vast majority of the $425 million plus property tax increase that's being proposed here today hasn't been looked at by anybody in public. And if we don't do that, I'm just unable to support in good conscience the proposed tax increase that's being asked for here and the record-breaking budget. I'll vote no on that. We can also do this over time because the budget's not due to the state until September 20th. So we don't have valuations until August 20th, and we don't have a requirement to submit a budget until September 20th. So we have plenty of time to do this right. And that's why I've asked to divide the question, approve those budgets, some of which you outlined that are justified and have come before us in public hearings, and then hold public hearings on the rest, so that there's some type of responsible oversight by this board of this $425 million record-breaking budget increase and associated property tax increase. The information that we got, is very cursory and doesn't give us much of an opportunity to drill down, for instance, on the fact that the Douglas County Health Center is, after property taxes, arguably the biggest income center of the county. If you look at the information that we have presented, it appears that the Douglas County Health Center is bringing in tens of millions of dollars, and rather than being a drag on the county budget, is actually one of the biggest draws on the county budget in terms of outside funding. We have property taxes of $130 million. This is on the revenue page submitted by Mr. Lorenz. We have general fund Department of Revenue of $83 million. And then if you go to the health center revenues and the mental health center revenues, you have $32 million in revenue. That's the third biggest source of revenue for this operation. Those types of things that we probably should discuss in the overall piecing together of a budget. When we're talking about you know, the better part of $500 million, and we're going to do it in, we've now been talking about this for 32 minutes. I'm not sure that that's really best practices. Let's have an open and transparent budget hearing process, as we've had in the past, on each and every department and elected official. Have them come before us, tell us what they're doing and how they're doing it, and make a request as the 6 departments and elected officials that you have had before us, and go from there. That's a responsible budgetary process. This isn't a budgetary process at all. This is just a pig in a poke. We're going to approve this today. We're going to raise people's property taxes today.
It's
And
Commissioner's time.
that's the end of it.
Commissioner Boyle. Commissioner Boyle.
Yes, you know, I don't know what the point is, Jim, in asking the assessor, register of deeds, and the treasurer who met their budget lid, who are not exceeding it. To me, it's a good use of time, and not to drag them in here and have them tell us that they're not going to exceed the maximum that we're going to allow them. I just don't see that as a good use of time. Now, if you want to, I mean, I will ask, frankly, I'll ask all of them to come to our next meeting and tell us what they asked for and what we're appropriating, and then you can drill down on, and talk to Diane about what she's doing. And I will do that. So I expect you to be here when I do that, and I expect you to drill down on their budgets, just like you said you want to. And I also, lastly, I guess I'll say is that, you know, if you're using the federal government as an example of how we ought to be running our budgets, I'm astounded. These are the people who cut taxes dramatically for all these corporations and all the bigwigs, and didn't do much help for anybody while these factories are closing. And now they just agreed to a record deficit that will plunge this country into very close to serious financial trouble, and certainly for our children and grandchildren. So that's where you are. I might be voting for this budget, but you just endorsed the federal government's adding several $1 trillion to the deficit. And I think that's a remarkable stance for you to take. I think it's irresponsible, frankly. So anyway, I will ask the other office holders to come down, if I may have the permission of the chair, and they can parade, and I don't want to waste their time, but this is how budgets are done in local government. First of all, very few people appear, and I appreciate Mr. Kagan's diligence. I mean, he is here all the time, as is Larry, and they ask good questions and make me think about things. And they've had, Doug personally has had influence on how I think about some of these things. And so, you know, it's a good service, but the public is, you know, they don't come to the city council meetings, they don't come to the school board very seldom. And probably the 2 men who are here who did come today could tell us how many have appeared at those budget hearings, because they probably did. So I just don't see penalizing elected and department heads who have been fiscally responsible and been able to not to raise their budgets. And you just cited all except for one, every department that's aligned with criminal justice. So that's what I have to say, and I'm really disappointed that you would take this course. You know, oddly enough, what's probably going to add some cost is the lawsuit that's been filed against us.
Commissioner Morgan.
Well, first of all, and I've said it before, you know, the disrespect that's shown to people that come before us and the way they're talked to. I apologize to you, Joe, because I appreciate the job that you do, and to have the kind of comments made with your knowledge of the budget and the work you do all year, I mean, is so unfortunate, and I don't see other commissioners doing that. It's really sad. Now, I heard a comment made that the greatest revenue source for us is a health center. I'd like to ask you a question. What is the amount, and I know Doug Kagan probably has the answer to this, but I'm not going to ask him because he is very knowledgeable of what we do. What is the amount that the county, if we didn't have the health center, because it's such a great revenue source, tell me how much money we would have in what the deficit would be if we didn't have the health center. What is the
Well, I
amount? we're-
think this year, we've broken out community mental health into the health center into two separate funds. And looking at it, I think we are looking at funding the community mental health center with $8 million of property tax dollars. So even though it is generating the $26 million, its expenses are $8 million higher than that. So we have to fund the difference with property tax dollars, which is about $8 million.
So if Mark Kraft and I owned a restaurant that was a great revenue source and brought in somewhere around 25 million, and you and Boyle owned it, and I told you we need 32 million to 33 million next year to keep it going, and I said, we're the best revenue source you have of your restaurants, yet we're losing 7-8 million a year. That would kind of be a little bit of a contradiction of was said here just earlier.
You would need additional funding.
Right. So Commissioner Boyle, what you said about the health center is an accurate statement. The second thing is with the other people, we could have them all come in, and I don't agree with Mike of bringing them all in, but basically what we did is had them hold the line on their budgets, give them the necessary monies for their payroll so that they
Right.
could continue based.
85% of which are union contracts, which
Right.
have been approved by the Board of Commissioners.
Correct. So that would be a waste. Secondly, I get tired of the constant interrogation of our people. We're fortunate to have the kind of people working here, our own staff, and I know Commissioner Kraft commented last week on how a couple of our people from the health center were questioned. I mean, it's just an unfair situation of how that
Just comes
takes
with the
place.
turf, Commissioner. I don't take it personally.
Good. And we're glad you're here. Lastly, I want to say, I believe in the total property tax increase, which we talked about as massive. For 6 years, we have not had an increase, and now it's going up 1.5, and on a $200,000 house, I believe that would be $30 a year, $2.50 a month. And all of us on this board know, and I think even Commissioner Kavanaugh knows it, that all of us have talked about the fact that the 90-some million, 97, whatever, is necessary because of the mandate from the legislature on courts, the county attorney's office, public defender's office, probation. It's necessary that we move toward that expansion and expenditure of that amount of money, which is why we would not have a mill levy increase if it wasn't for that particular project.
That's correct.
Am I accurate?
That's accurate. That's correct.
And
That's
the
how
other
it was prepared.
thing, and I attended all of the town hall meetings that we had in north, south, and so on, and I get tired of hearing nothing's been discussed, that we haven't, we're taking 15 minutes. This is a public hearing. We could be here for 2 hours if people wanted to come before us and talk about it. I mean, am I correct, Mr. Chairman? So, to bring them in when they've held the line doesn't really make sense at all, unless you tend to feel that would be a good thing, just to go through a questioning
That was a
process.
discussion that you and Commissioner Boyle and I had, and we did it last year, and we thought it worked well, and the different departments were happy with it, so that's why we kept with it this year.
And I found something interesting last week when I didn't know, and I don't think other commissioners knew, that there had been a lawsuit filed, and before Teresa told us that, Commissioner Kavanaugh knew about the lawsuit that was
PJ,
filed.
I'm actually wrap up.
And that's going to be another costly matter for us.
You got another 5 if you want to continue.
I don't need it.
Okay.
I just thank you for your work, Joe, and
All right.
I say we move ahead.
See no
Call
further
for the
questions.
question.
There is a motion, a second on the floor. But let me just say, Commissioner Boyle, for that other, just for the public, the process that was set up is all those that have changes would come before us, but each person that had a committee had the liberty to have their own separate meeting. So what I would suggest is if the individual committee members want to ask those people to come and talk about that, they can do it, and we've always had that option, and it can be public. And just let me say, best practice-wise, I think as long as I've been on this board, 15 years, we've done it this way. Actually, it's improved through where we brought it out, and there's always been avenues for tweaks, and you all have been open to that. And so I think in the years that I've been here, we haven't had a substantial budget overrun. The process has been there. There's been nothing that's been secret to that degree. So with that, there's a motion, a second. Please vote.
Motion passes. Commissioner Kavanaugh voting no. Other commissioners present voting yes.
Item 7 is committees and discussions. Item A is the budget report, and I'm assuming there's nothing there.
No.
Okay. We go on to item B, which is administrative services, and item 1 is approval of the annual GIS and local with MAPPA. What's the will of the board? Motion by Commissioner Duda, second by Commissioner Boyle. Please vote.
Motion passes 6-0.
Item G is Human Resource Committee. Item 1 is the weekly personnel report from the Civil Service. Item 2 is legislative issues, which there are none. Just note, I think everybody received the email about the date set for next year's legislative breakfast, which is January 13th in 2020, that morning. Also, we do have need for the executive session for litigation. I'm sorry, Commissioner Morgan.
When you mentioned the legislative breakfast next year, appreciate that. What about us having that?
Tri-County?
Tri-County,
I
and
think that's-
maybe,
that's still being-
well, not the Tri-County, I'm sorry, just meeting with the state senators, the commissioners and our state senators. We might get Sean to work on that and figure out, hey, when could we maybe do that sooner rather than later? We'll think about that.
We can work on that. The fall meeting, just with gathering them and talking about concerns. We'll work on that.
And we'd maybe have it at the health center.
Okay. Commissioner Boyle?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I was talking with Ben Gray yesterday, and he brought up a bill that I was not quite that familiar, we're not familiar with at all. I'm ashamed I'm not, but I think it was 104, which talks about if you raise your property taxes, you have to make other reductions or some such thing. I'm not sure if I got the number right, but I'll check. We need to discuss that. But Ben was really unnerved by it because it's one of the, I'm not sure who
No,
brought
it's
it.
not, it's not a
Is that what it
reduction.
is?
You want to explain to the Lanahan bill?
104, is that something you're aware of?
Yeah, we're aware.
Okay.
It's Mark's bill,
That's
so
fine.
yeah.
I can talk to you about it after.
It's LB 103, that's Senator Linehan's bill. and-
Yes.
And we all are very aware of it, we've all reviewed it, and Teresa as well.
Okay, so,
and-
well, we can talk about it another time. but
Yeah,
I was very
absolutely.
concerned about it.
Sure.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Again, with that, we do have executive session. With that, we reserve the right to enter into executive session in order to protect the public interest with respect to discussion regarding the item of litigation. Is there a motion by the board? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Duda. Please vote. Oh, I mean, I don't know.
It's okay to call me Duda.
Commissioner Morgan, second, sorry.
Or maybe you just called me dude.
Just don't call me Duda. Or you can call me Duda.
So that's in Lincoln, this.
Yes. And
Commissioner
again,
Morgan.
we're going to executive session for litigation.
Yeah?
I'm sorry.
There a motion to
reconvene
and adjourn?
and adjourn.
Motion by Commissioner Kraft, there's a second. Second by Commissioner Duda, please vote.
You know, the building commission likes cookies for executive session, just saying.
Yes, I hear you.
I'm all for that.
Good job today. I told PJ last week. PJ's having trouble.
Right. Just gonna assume that everyone's a yes.
Al and I voted.
You're a yes too? Okay.
I had to carry my stuff.
Oh, sure, no problem. Yeah. All right, motion passes, all commissioners present voting yes.